Take it home where you spread it around. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. That's what election day is all about. And the biggest gun we got is called the ballot box. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. And she'll bring some new ones in, and they will start the show again. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out.
On April 15th, the week that was, from WBRNRadio and on the Boston Red Network. The past week was an interesting week, as we often say, but being interesting in that it was the first full week of testimony at the trial of Mohammed Noor. Noor is accused of murdering Ruchek Dimon in the Midwest city of Minneapolis. Dimon had called 911 complaining about a noise in the alley behind her home, and she recalled the 911 operator, and they said a patrol car was en route. And she made the mistake of going into the alley and was literally shot dead by Noor. And there have been all kinds of explanations of this, and they have been debunked at trial from what limited access we have, because the judge in the trial did not allow audio or video recording of the trial. Therefore, we have to rely on second-hand accounts, and those are very brief summaries at best. And the reporting has not been as full as one would expect it to be. We'll have a special wrap-up on the last week's events at that particular trial. One of the highlights there was the meeting of a number of coppers that had been involved in previous killings of people. One went back to the 90s, the murder of a young African-American named Tysel Nelson. We looked it up, and evidently the police in one of these police community schemes took Tysel fishing. They had a picture of him fishing with these police officers. He was later killed by these police officers in an alley. An old gun was found there that was totally, the only word I could come up with from what the news reports was, decrepit. Now this was in 1990, almost 30 years ago. This Lieutenant Daniel May was the shooter. Now May was the watch commander for Noor. He appears in the trial, what could only one could term the ghost of Tysel Nelson. And that was an interesting case. One of the people involved in the wrongful death action that came later was none other than Keith Ellison, who is now the Attorney General of Minnesota and a former Congress person in Minnesota. So we have a cast. And then we also have one of the coppers involved in the killing of Jamar Clark in the city of Minneapolis was there on the scene. So you have a whole list of characters, like a rogues gallery all at once converging. And these were the people giving advice to Noor. So it's worth exploring. No doubt the civil litigator in the wrongful death suit that's coming up, Brown, is looking at this with glee in his eye. The rainmaker is coming. The other event of the week was the seizure of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy, which was all points to a made-up caper, that it was already prearranged with this Lenny Moreno. He is the new president of Ecuador, and he's been exposed in some papers as a crook. So thus he did not like Julian Assange. WikiLeaks published the paper. They are publishers. With some of these excuses that they gave, it's very similar to what happened in Justine Riziak Damon's murder. And they came up with that he didn't abide by quote-unquote house rules. He had to pay his own medical expense. He had to take care of his cat in terms of hygiene there, and be respectful of personnel. Now, what had happened was the personnel that were there when Julian Assange entered the embassy 7 years ago were all gone, because under the new government replaced everyone, including the ambassador there in London, under Moreno, as opposed to under Rafael Correa, who was the president and spoke out on that situation. We have a special program on Julian Assange, and we're calling it Julian Assange, the Oracle of Journalism. And there have been various articles written about Julian Assange, and so now he sits in a jail in central London, we assume. He's already been charged there with jumping bail, which is a 6-month sentence if convicted, and the U.S. is seeking extradition of him on a conspiracy charge with Chelsea Manning. Of course, Chelsea Manning has already been pardoned, but Chelsea Manning is in jail because he would not testify before a grand jury. Now, what happens is usually conspiracy is a catch-all. They can come with other charges later in the ball game. In the words of the West Virginia Senator Meacham, he's ours now. Well, this kind of behavior in 2019 is not appropriate behavior, no doubt about that. So this is what exposed to in those two cases that have a potential for a miscarriage of justice. Not only that, Chelsea Manning, when was he imprisoned in the stockades, he was abused, set in solitary confinement 23 hours a day or whatever it is, and the heat turned off or whatever, on the conditions that amount to torture. Now, in international law, Julian Assange could not be extradited to this type of nation, period. And there is under president in UK law, when old May was the Home Secretary under the Tory government, that she in fact did not extradite somebody named McDougal, who was a hacker, to the U.S. because of the known conditions in U.S. jails. So that is not an unusual procedure there. How long could this take? A number of years. Some people say as little as 3. Some people say it could go on for 10 or more years. And by that time, if it went on for 10 or more years, DJ Trump would be long gone, one way or the other. So those are some of the big issues there. The other issue is DJ Trump is now supporting, evidently, sanctuary cities. He wants to deposit some of the caravan immigrants in sanctuary cities such as San Francisco, Oakland, etc., and would just dump them there, basically speaking. And he came up with that idea several months ago. The Homeland Security people did not, as LBJ would say, cotton to that suggestion, and now those people are gone. So who knows what DJ Trump will do in terms of where he is in the scheme of things. He's come up with another video, an edited video, based upon the lie from the New York Post, which is a Murdoch newspaper. It has in the background 9/11 buildings burning and the comments of Representative Ilhan Omar. And it's just a snippet of the comments. We'll have to present the entire 25-minute speech she made on the West Coast to CAR, which is an Islamic organization. We'll get that. It was kind of behind me because there's so many things going. We were going with an open source report on Friday, but got bogged down with other issues. So now, once again, we find ourselves in a hole. Incidentally, this weekend we'll have the Numbers Man, that's our macroeconomic program. It will air. And we'll have Sunday programming. Not certain what will be on a Sunday, probably Julian Assange, depending on how we handle the Damon Ruzak trial. With it, one of the major things out there. And when we finish up here, we'll have some of the On the Road series, and we'll be doing this and probably turning it into a special program for the 2020 campaign trail. We'll have Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was in Madison, Wisconsin, speaking at the union there, student union, on the lake in Madison. I remember that because I went down there in the 80s to substitute for a gentleman that was out of town for 2 or 3 weeks. Can't remember now. This is a long time ago in Madison, Wisconsin. So nonetheless, let's get to the rest of our program here. We have Uncle Carl Rowe, as we usually do. We have some polling, a number of polls here. We have the Cadillac of presidential approval polls, Gallup, and DJ Trump has actually risen in that poll roughly around 45%, and he's only been there 2 times in the past. So that once right after the re-election, and when his the first summit he had in Singapore with Chairman of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, and now after the Mueller report. We have always, at this mic, stated that this Mueller report was way overplayed. Firstly, the summary was given by his Attorney General Barr, and that's a 3-page summary. It was actually 4. We call it 3 pages because the first page was just a little introductory type situation. Now, when the full report comes out, it'll be redacted, but it's 40 and some pages. We don't know how much will be redacted. That will be a different issue. But when you set up your strategy, or tactic, whichever one you want to call it, based on one report produced by Justice Department that is basically a part of the Trump administration, at least some of the strategic leadership is. Now some of the others have been around for a very long time. But at the same time, you immediately see trends going on here as to how they're trying to keep the lid on this thing as long as they can. From a tactical standpoint, you would never make your major political issue a report in the first instance. There are congressional committees that are gathering all kinds of information. There have been all kinds of hearings on this, and then you have a very tenuous thing of the Russian Federation's in a so-called interference in the 2016 election, which was a smokescreen in itself. There were a lot of things going on in 2016 but there is actually no evidence that the Russians involved. One other additional thing, there have been a Swedish programmer arrested in Ecuador. I think it was Quito. That's unfolding. And then there was a statement that the former foreign minister had contact with some Russian cyber types, characters that he'd never met. Anyway, this story just tends to mushroom into a Disneyland operation there. And much of this can be to the Democratic Party. A lot of funds were expended on flushing out this Mueller report and various other things, when the Democratic Party should have spent their time on developing issues to deal with DJ Trump in 2020. Very, very important there. So now let's get to some of the polling and a summary of some things happening from the New York Times. The Washington Post, actually. And let's see, here we go. Here we don't go. Just a second here. We punched literally the wrong button. Okay. We'll just start with Uncle Carl because he's the first one up here. He's writing as usual in the bastion of business, the Wall Street Journal. The lovely but unloved Electoral College. That's been an issue that's been around for a very, very long time. Abolishing the Electoral College is fashionable campaign pledge from Democrats running for president, declaring that every vote matters. Senator Warren said we should get rid of it. Senator Gillibrand proclaimed American democracy can't function until that happens. Senator Booker, Beto O'Rourke, and Julian Castro support ending it, as does the governor of Washington State, Inslee. And the mayor of South Bend, it's got to go. And Bernie Sanders, the co-leader in the race as this state, called it a bit weird and wants to rethink it, while Senator Harris is open to discussion, along with Senator Klobuchar. Because Senator Klobuchar is too busy trying to build interstate repair highways. Anyway, now she's become the senator of big things. Yet there's a zero chance of this happening. To abolish the Electoral College, Congress would have to propose a constitutional amendment by 2/3 of both houses, and then 3/4 of the states need to ratify it. Since the Electoral College gives a larger vote to less populated states, there will be more than enough opposition to block such a move. Still, it's worth for contemplating what would happen if the Electoral College disappeared, as Alexander Hamilton, one of the favorite people of Professor Reed, Ishmael Reed of Oakland, voted in a defense of the defense of Federalist Papers 68. If the manner of it be not perfect, it's at least excellent. Despite infrequent challenges, the Electoral College has given the U.S. remarkable stability. Eliminating it would hardly usher in an era of democratic satisfaction. Opponents focus on the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton received 2,868,000 and 686 votes there, more than DJ Trump, a margin of 2.9 9/10 there, yet Trump eked out a narrow victory in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, defeating Hillary Clinton by 304 to 276. Well, when you lose the states, particularly like Pennsylvania, as a Democrat, you're in trouble. And Wisconsin and Michigan. Wisconsin was under the administration. This is something to remember. Boss Walker, who has now been retired finally. And Pennsylvania, the Republicans had ruled the roost there at the time, so they wrote the election laws and were responsible also for the gerrymandering in those two states. In Michigan, you had Gateway Snyder there as a governor in his regime, and the Republicans in Michigan. Michigan's a state's been trending right-wing / populist / Tea Party since the Clinton administration, and you had the bombing of the courthouse in Oklahoma City. One of the co-defendants was from Michigan. So you can understand what is going on in the parts of Michigan. But the reason that Clinton lost Michigan was she didn't campaign there, or lost Wisconsin. She did campaign some in Michigan, and she campaigned in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania being a command and control state there, but a low turnout. The followers of O.J. Simpson, situated in Philadelphia primarily, did not turn out in record numbers as they did for Barack Obama. So thus, he had problems. The same thing happened in Milwaukee, that's in the state of Wisconsin, and in Detroit, in the Motor City in Michigan. So you've had some problems, and also the general weakness of the Democratic Party, both in Michigan and in Wisconsin. If you recall, the 2008 election, we covered that Pennsylvania, of course, is the state that the monster won, running against Barack Obama. However, Barack Obama had to reorganize the Democratic Party inner structure in Pennsylvania. He finally won in the general election, but that was what had to happen. So in some of these states, the Democratic Party and the Progressive Core has to be totally reorganized and rebuilt, as is what is going on in Texas. Now, in certain other states, one comes to mind, Florida, a gangster state, a state controlled controlled by Boss Scott, who is in the Senate. Now it's Boss DeFunis, is that his name? Anyway, whatever he is, has that, and they have a Republican legislature. There's a number of reasons for that. Basically, the undermining of the vote in the state of Florida. If you recall back to 2000, the election there was stolen from Albert Gore of Tennessee, and G.W. Bush became the president on a 5-4 for the Supreme Court. At the time, what was her name? Senator O'Connor was, we'd say, the typical vote. It could have went the other way. Her only explanation was we wanted to get it over with. But that happens. You could expect something of that nature to happen because there was a problem in Florida to begin with. It's sort of a complicated election law there. You have what you call the protests and contests. And I may have those backwards. It's been a long time since that's obviously happened. But when you're talking about contests, protests, you have to get that right. And it was wrong. What happened, G.W. Bush brought in Baker, James Baker. And Baker and his team did a better job of handling that situation. And the Democrats were utterly disorganized. Al Gore was running around at the same time. The right-wingers in Washington were protesting. He lived at, the vice president lived at the Naval Observatory. We're going to take that over. they had to rely on the AFL-CIO types to bring out some supporters. And at the time, the president of the AFL-CIO, they couldn't get hold of him. Now remember, 2000, we basically were still relegated to pagers. There were mobile phones, that were coming into the situation. But this AFL-CIO type did not have a mobile phone. I'm not sure if he even had a pager. So that just told you, what the state of things were. Whereas the Republicans had prepared, they assumed that Al Gore would win, which he did. He did win the popular vote, and he would have won the electoral vote. It went down to 300 and some votes in Florida. But the situation was that the Republicans had already prepared to protest the election. They were going to have the late Billy Graham, I suppose, do various types of edicts, ecclesiastical edicts or whatever. I'm not sure in his religion if they do that sort of thing. But perhaps as they do in Iran, he would issue various types of religious interpretation. It could be ecclesiastical, but it also could be a fatwa. Anyway, they were going to use that and spend millions of dollars in newspapers saying how the election had been stolen from them, and get right-wing protesters into Washington in great numbers, in thousands of people. That was their plan. Never happened. Back to him. Opponents are focused on the winning GOP candidates may have fallen short in the popular vote in 1876 and 1888, only because African Republicans voted in the South was being exterminated by violence. Those were the radical Republicans. They have to understand that. All the TV networks called Florida with the election for Al Gore at 8:02 Eastern time, while voters were still casting in the Panhandle of Florida. Turnout rose from 1996 to 2000, but it's no coincidence that the increase was a quarter less in states where the polls were open. That has been happening for a very long time because we have a sophisticated setup, but that has changed. The media declared the winner over, while many Western Democrats turned out to seal their wins triumphantly. Republicans were more likely to be discouraged to stay home, probably costing G.W. Bush several 100,000 votes in 2 states, New Mexico and in Oregon. Well, New Mexico and Oregon were different states. Now we're talking about in 2000. Since that time, they both trimmed blue, so that's not going to be repeated. The remaining 2 elections in which the winner failed to achieve the popular vote plurality were the mess. In 1824, none of 4 electoral candidates had an electoral college majority, so the House decided to vote for John Quincy Adams. And in 2016, in contrast, imagine how many recounts there would be if the popular vote decided at all. Every safe Republican and solidly Democratic state would order recounts, as each party would be trying to add to the national numbers. They have every reason to. James Garfield's popular vote margin in 1880 was only 1,898 votes, or 0.1%. Now that was 1880. John F. Kennedy, 1960, 0.17 tenths of a vote. Grover Cleveland, 1884. 0.57 there, and Tricky Dick in 1968, that would have been over Hubert Horatio Humphrey, 0.7%. James Pope in 1844 by 1.45%. And Jimmy Carter from Plains, Georgia in 1976 by 2.06 there. In each of these 6 instances, the winner held a hefty electoral college margin. No doubt about that. They got the right states. Considering the 19 contests, nearly 1/3 of all presidential races in which the president came in office with less than 50% of the popular vote, it was the substantial electoral college victories that provided the mandate to govern. Well, no doubt about it. If you carry for the Republicans, it's always been pivotal to carry Ohio. So if you carry Ohio, you carry Florida and Texas. We've always advocated at this mic that as states change, the key is to turn Texas blue. If Texas were blue, this would offset the criminal effect in Florida. And at the same time, Ohio needs to be reorganized. Now, several states that are in transition and would have transitioned had not been for criminality, voter suppression, etc., were Georgia and North Carolina. The Republicans know, as LBJ would say, that anyone's been to a goat roping contest, that North Carolina is trending in the other direction, and so is Georgia. They're trending back to what Jimmy Carter did in Georgia in the 70s when he was the governor of Georgia. So those are some things that are sticking out very prominently. Look at our time here. We do have time to go to AccuWeather. Company led by Trump nominee was ripe with harassment, including groping, kissing, as reports there. This is a federal workplace investigation found rapid sexual harassment and retaliation. This is AccuWeather, a federal contract including groping, etc. Now, they have nominated this character named Barry Myers to lead the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Detailed results of the investigation not previously reported were compiled last year by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance and obtained by the Post. It determined that AccuWeather under Myers fostered a ripe culture for sexual harassment, turned a blind eye to allegations of egregious conduct and retaliation against those who complained. According to the report, the investigation was prompted by a complaint on the 6th of September 2016, an election year, alleging a hostile work environment and termination based on sexual orientation and sex. Many of the complaints from AccuWeather workers followed. Meyer was tapped in 2017 to lead the NOAA because Pennsylvania-based AccuWeather executive in 2017 stepped down, agreed to divest himself of any company ownership in accordance with an ethics pledge to the U.S. government's ethics office. That's according to his brother Joe Meyer. His brother Joe Meyer, according to the company, his brother Joe Meyer is founder and president of AccuWeather. Now, that is one of the private situations. We've used them before. We primarily use the Weather Channel, which is now part of IBM. We won't read the rest of this, but it is as a good friend Dave Jones in Australia would say, a dodgy situation. AccuWeather agreed to pay $290,000 as part of the settlement, detailed in a conciliation agreement published in June. The agreement includes a letter that was sent to former workers who worked for AccuWeather between January 1st, 2004 and December 21st, 2017, and they'd be eligible for a $7,250 settlement. Peanuts. This Barry and Joe Myers donated money to Rick Satarian, who introduced legislation aimed at curtailing government competition with private. This is just sweet. With private weather services. Meyer and his brother, who pressed the government on weather-related programs that could affect AccuWeather's financial situation. So there are definitely conflicts of interest there, and he's actively lobbied to privatize the National Weather Service, which works day in and day out to protect the lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans. That's a very important story. We're going to end this with Charles Van Doren. Charles Van Doren was a figure who died at 93 in the 50s, a quiz show scandal there, period. The telegraphic Ivy League school scholar whose winnings run as a 1950s game show contestant made him a central figure in an answer ring scandal that raised enduring questions about deception in popular entertainment. Dr. Van Doren became a full-fledged TV contestant at a time when the networks dominated the airwaves and commanded the viewership of tens of millions of Americans. He came to embody the illusion, which at the time seemed reality, but quiz show contestants just to earn their fame and fortune that transformed them from ordinary people into cultural icons. To later generations, his story was known in part through Robert Redford's quiz show. Should check that movie out there. I deceived my friends, he said at the time. I had millions of them. Dr. Van Doren was an unlikely candidate for TV stardom. He was an author, historian, and Columbia University educated, whose father was a renowned scholar and a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. His mother and uncle also made distinguished contributions to American letters. Dr. Van Doren was a polymath with a master's in mathematics and a doctorate in English. He was making $4,400 a year as an English instructor at Columbia. He did not even own a TV set, and by chance he met at a party somebody named Albert Freeman, a TV producer. Years later in New York Magazine, Dr. Van Doren wrote an account of the conversation that led to his appearance on the NBC show 21. They wanted me to find a contestant who'd beat Herb Stemp. Freeman said, referring to the then champion who was portrayed as a walking library from the Bronx with a tight haircut and bad suit. The NBC show I get it right in a minute here. Inspired by the card game Blackjack, featured two contestants in isolated booths and required to answer questions of increased difficult efforts to win 21 points. The questions could be dovish, and Dr. Van Doren presses a carefully manufactured act as he contemplated them. Name the second, name the fourth and fifth wife from Henry VIII, and describe their fates. Host Jack Barry said during the episode in which Van Doren beset Stemple. Finally get the name right. You want me to name the second, third, and fifth wives? What happens to all of them? That's right. Well, I have to think a minute. And more laughter. Van Doren worked his way through the answers. He gazed into space, gestured with his hands, scratched his eyebrows, and put a hand to his mouth and bit his lower lip. This is just too much. When Van Doren finally produced the last piece of needed information, Catherine Howard had been beheaded. He smiled broadly, uncoiled in relief, and mopped his brow to exciting cheers. On occasion, Dr. Van Doren deliberately gave incorrect answers, adding the illusion of truthfulness. He unseated Stimple and embarked on a reign that lasted until the following March. He won a then staggering $129,000 before being dethroned by Vinnie Nearing, a New York lawyer, asked to name the king of 6 countries. Van Duren missed the Belgian monarch. 21 was not conceived as a rigged show, but the veteran producer Daniel Enright and his staff had made it one to keep on the air. Sponsors were said to call Enright after its lackluster premiere to demand an improvement. The cast, real people, are protagonists in the continuous series, kind of like Donald Trump's Apprentice. By the late 50s, suspicion had been aroused about game show cheating, and Congress had hearings. Act 21 was ensnagged after the former contestant James Snodgrass supplied incontrovertible evidence of the fix. So the fix was in. He described the difficulty he had extracting himself from his celebrity. This is Dr. Van Doren here. NBC had awarded him a 3-year, $150,000 consulting contract that included regular appearances on the Today Show, where he was allowed to speak about the 17th century poets. That's all. He was a scholar. Columbia, where he recently made a professor, accepted his resignation. He was fired by NBC, and in 1962, the Washington, New York courtroom, Dr. Van Duren was one of several associates of the 21 and other shows who pled guilty to misdemeanor perjury in connection with an earlier grand jury testimony. Van Duren was never entirely forthcoming about why he initially agreed to be on the rigged show. I had been acting a role for 10 or 15 years, maybe all my life, he said, after his involvement in the scandal emerged. It's a role of thinking that I had done far more than I had done, accomplished more than I have accomplished. Anyway, he was born in 1926 in New York. Charles Van Duren's childhood was largely spent in Manhattan row houses and the family's countryside home in Connecticut. After the quiz show scandal, he joined, nonetheless, an Encyclopedia Britannica's editorial staff, becoming a vice president. He wrote or co-wrote several fictional and non-fictional books. He returned to education, teaching English at the University of Connecticut, Torrington's campus, not far from his home in Cornwall. His wife is still around since 1957. For decades, Van Duren declined to discuss 21 publicly. In his New Yorker essay, he recounted that Julian Corinne, a producer of Redford's quiz show, said the director wanted to pay him $100,000 to consult on the show. Our family had had a meeting and sitting around our kitchen table. Van Duren said John, our son, was for taking the money. He said, everybody's making money out of this. Shouldn't you? Van Duren agreed with his son. His daughter did not. Neither did his wife. Please don't be a fool. The next day, Van Duren decided to forego the involvement. So that is our story there. And let's quickly get to the Masters. For Tiger Woods, evidently running is not permitted at the Augusta National Golfing Center, Pro Links Center, whatever you want to call it. Evidently, a security type ran out onto the course, and that basically did on the 14th hole. I'm reading from ESPN here. The whole of the second round of the Masters. where an overheard Georgia Bureau of Investigation special agent nearly took out most of the special golfers on the planet. The most special golfer on the planet, Tiger Woods' dramatic year-long and chance comeback couldn't have crashed and burned right on the spot. Could have, excuse me. Woods could have lost his shot at the 15th green, shot at a 15th green jacket. His chance to win his first major in more than a decade because of a man trying to protect him had violated one of many cardinal rules of Augusta National: no running allowed. You can stand at Augusta, you can sit at Augusta, you can even walk, but everyone has ever passed through those forbidding gates enters this moment to 1950s. No, you can never run at Augusta. I found that out the hard way covering one of my first, this is the author here speaking many years ago when my slow jog from the clubhouse to the media center was interrupted by a security guard who thrust out his open right hand and screamed at me to stop. Anyway, we'll finish this up here. Fairly long article here. What doesn't kill you or chip you make you stronger. Woods won his 14th major title on one leg. He's fully capable of winning his 15th on a 2. Anyway, he overcame 4 back surgeries, including a spinal fusion, pain that left him bedridden. Friday, he overcame a cop who forgot that you're not allowed to run at Augusta. So that is it, and we'll continue to report on the Masters. We'll go now to, I'm not sure why we're there. You know, sometimes things fall apart. To the NBA. The NFL is done for the year. Let's see. We don't... Anyway, that'll be later today. Sorry about that. Major League Baseball. Sometimes. Cubs are 5-1 over the Angels. They were in Wrigley Field. The final in looks like 7 here. Game must have been called. White Sox 9-6 over the Yankees. The line score there. Sox 12 hits, 1 error. The Yankees 7 hits and no errors in 10. Pirates and Nationals. Pirates 6-3. Rays 11-7 over Toronto. Red Sox 6-4 over the Orioles at the Green Monster. Philly back to their winning ways, 9-1 over the Marlins. The Mets 6-2 over Atlanta. The Athletics 8-6 over the Rangers. And the Royals, a game we tuned into, 8-1 over Cleveland. The Padres 2-1 over the D-backs. And a game that became a disaster, the Brewers 8-5 over the Dodgers. The line score there, Brewers 12 hits, no errors, and the Dodgers 12 hits, 1 error. Even Kenley Jansen himself couldn't get it together. The Astros 10-6 over the Mariners. Giants 3-2 over the Rockies in 18. Very long game. And the Tigers and Twins was postponed due to ice, snow, and you name it. Stanley Cup playoffs. Columbus stunned. Vegas gets even there. And that. So we have the Blue Jackets 5-4 over the Blues. Oh, excuse me, 5-4 over the Lightning. Sorry about that. And the Blues 4-3 over the Winnipeg Jets. The Penguins lost to the Islanders 3-1, and the Golden Knights of Las Vegas 5-3. So I suppose this was it. We'll look at the story here from the National Hockey. The Columbus Blue Jackets followed up their Game 1 surprised with an enthusiastic win over the heavily favored Tampa Bay Lightning. One of three series that moved to 2-1 on Friday night. Here's what happened the last time of what to watch for today's edition of the ESPN Stanley Cup Playoff Daily. I suppose we can get to that. Anyway, the Columbus Blue Jackets are 5-1 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. I don't know exactly where they were. Anyway, two towns that previously did not have one. Game 2, the Islanders and Pittsburgh Penguins 3-1. The Islanders hold a 2-zip series. My poor Penguins, I guess, are on their way home. Game 2, the St. Louis Blues and Winnipeg Jets. Blues 4-3 there. The Blues lead the series 2-0. Game 2, the Vegas Golden Knights and the Sharks of San Jose. Series is tied up 1-1. Much more civilized series there. And nonetheless, this will do it for the week that was. Oh, we had some polling here. We'll get the polling. We did the Gallup. That was 45 for DJ Trump. Highest he's ever been. We'll have to leave it at that. Bernie Sanders in Madison, Wisconsin. An edited version of his roughly 50-minute presentation there on the lake at the University of Wisconsin. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on the political side. We'll have a special program on Sunday. We'll have the numbers man. That's our macroeconomics presentation. We are usually pretty good at presenting that one. And still back to that ever-elusive open source report. Have a good weekend, everyone. Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Good day.
This weekend, I will be not only here in Wisconsin, but in Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 4 years ago, despite losing the popular vote by 3 million votes, Donald Trump carried all of those states and won enough electoral votes to be elected president. Together, we are going to make sure that that does not happen again. We're going to win here in Wisconsin. We're going to win in Indiana. We're going to win in Ohio. We're going to win in Michigan. We're going to win in Pennsylvania. And together, we're going to win this election. Now, obviously, in our country, people have different points of view. Here in Wisconsin, in my state of Vermont, and all across the nation, and that is what democracy is about. You have your point of view, I have mine. But I happen to believe that whether you are a progressive or a conservative or a moderate, you are not proud that today we have a president of the United States who is a pathological liar. And I have talked to many conservatives who hold that view. The president of the United States becomes in many ways a model for the children of this country, and there are very few people who are proud that we have a leader today who lies all of the time. And in fact, he has lied thousands of times since he has been president and when he was on the campaign trail. And of all of the lies, little and small, that he has told, the biggest lie of all was when he said during the campaign that he was going to defend the interests of the working class of our country and that he was going to take on the powerful special interest to do that. What a monstrous lie that was. And let me give you just a few examples. As many of you recall, here in Wisconsin and all across the country, Trump told the American people that he would provide health care to everybody. Remember that? As president, Trump did exactly the opposite. Today, under the Trump administration, 7 million people have already lost their health insurance, and even more frighteningly, Trump vigorously supported an effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act and throw 32 million Americans off the health care they currently have. And I say to Donald Trump, trying to throw 32 million Americans off their health insurance is not defending the working class of this country. During his campaign, as many of you will recall, Donald Trump said, hey, I'm a different type of Republican. I'm not going to cut Medicare. I'm not going to cut Medicaid. I'm not going to cut Social Security. People like Paul Ryan would do that. Not me. I won't do it. But I want all of you to know, and I want the people of Wisconsin to know, that Trump's budget that he brought forth in March would cut Medicaid by $1.5 trillion, cut Medicare by $845 billion, and the last two budgets he brought forth would make cuts in Social Security as well. All of you know that Medicaid covers 2/3 of the nursing home care costs in this country. So I want you to think about the families in Wisconsin, in Vermont, and around the nation who have moms or dads dealing with Alzheimer's who are now in a nursing home. When you cut $1.5 trillion from Medicaid, I don't know what happens to those people or what happens to the families who are trying to take care of them. Cutting $1.5 trillion from Medicaid and over $800 billion from Medicare is not supporting the working families of this country. Trump promised when he ran for office here in Wisconsin, all over the country, that he promised the American people that the rich will not be gaining at all under his tax plan. Remember that one? Well, shock of all shock, that turned out to be a major lie. Turns out that over a 10-year period, 83% of all of the tax breaks went to the top 1%. And the result of that is that today we have corporations like Amazon. Anyone know how much Amazon paid in federal income taxes? Now, how insane is that you have a widely profitable corporation owned by the wealthiest guy in America not paying a nickel in federal income taxes? And that's true for General Motors, Chevron, IBM, Eli Lilly, and many, many other corporations. Trump's tax proposals did not benefit working families. They benefited the wealthy and large corporations. We are talking about taking on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, who are charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Now, you want to hear about a dysfunctional healthcare system? All right, I'll tell you. Now, this is really crazy stuff. And that is that last year, the 5 major drug companies made $50 billion in profits. These CEOs make outrageous compensation packages, and yet 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions that their doctors write. I mean, just think how insane that is. People go to the doctor, they're sick. Votes by demonizing minorities. That is what's going on. And what this election is about is whether we strengthen democracy or whether we move toward oligarchy. It's about whether we bring our people together or we have national leadership that tries to divide us up. It is about whether we have grassroots activism or whether we have billionaires who continue to control the economic and political life of the nation. In my view, if we are prepared to stand up to Trump and his desire to divide us up, if we understand we cannot allow him to demonize minorities, to demonize undocumented immigrants, if we understand that there is no such thing as a blue state or a red state, but that in every state in this country, working people are struggling to take care of their families. If we are prepared to roll up our sleeves and get involved in the political process, if we are prepared to do all of that, at the end of the day, what we know is that the 1% may have unlimited amounts of money and they may have an enormous amount of power. But at the end of the day, the 1% is 1%. And I may not be a great mathematician, but the 99% is a lot more than the 1%. So brothers and sisters, we are fighting for the future of this country. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting to protect our children and our parents. We are fighting to preserve the planet. This is no time for anybody to be talking about being depressed or in despair. Now is the time to get to work. Now is the time to transform this country. Now is the time to win this election. Thank you all very much.